like at every meal, and there's livestock running around everywhere, and even if there is a slope that you wouldn't think you would even be able to walk on, they clear it, and out go the cattle. So that's especially the case down there. With that, this can cause the land to totally change in its fertility, and overgrazing prevents the growth of new plants, certainly of new forests, and it changes the whole dynamic of that ecosystem. Each year, forests the size of Panama are lost to whatever reason. And then deforestation is obviously speeding up global warming, because if you have a beautiful big woods of several hundred acres and you go in and you cut that down, you're basically condemning everything that lives in that forest ecosystem, the animals and plants that live on the forest floor, the insects, and all the things that make up that really rich forest soil really only operate within that type of ecosystem. Once it dries out, the sun comes in, penetrates all that, it totally changes that dynamic. And again, financial profits are one of the main reasons, but for most cases, it's looking at the next picture and where can I make more money and what can I do to this to elicit some money from it. So the soil in the forest is moist, but once that once the trees are cleared, the soil really doesn't have any protection, dries out from sun exposure. You've got salamanders that live in the top several inches of the soil. They have to live there. They have to go under rocks in the heat of the summer because it's too hot otherwise. And if that really gets hot because there's no forest cover, you could wipe out entire species with things like that, especially over a period of time. So the highest percentage of forest loss is in Malaysia, and the highest area of forest loss is in Brazil. Now, if you think about it, Brazil's a pretty huge country. They've got a good bit of our rainforest through that section that runs through the Amazon runs all through there. Look at it on a map, and I could have put a map on there to show it to you, but it's very interesting when you think of the size. Malaysia is obviously considerably smaller than Brazil, so it makes sense that they are losing their forest loss, because their country is smaller. The rainforests cover 6% of the Earth's surface, but they are home to 50% of plant and animal species. So think about that in general, that as that diminishes and the rainforests change in either their habitat or even the whole complexion of the rainforest change, you are going to lose species. And we have already lost species since the time we've been on Earth. There have been several extinctions. And that's, for those of you that bird, we know about the passenger pigeon, things like that, where there are millions of them, and they're gone during the time that humans have been out there doing all the things we do. So let's take it to a smaller area. Let's go into the United States. From 1990 to 2010, we've lost 950,000 acres of forest each year. Okay, that's not over that entire span. That's each year in that span. So when you think about the loss, we have a total of almost 10 million acres of timber that is harvested each year. But most of that timber is regenerated, so they're doing this in a sustainable way, and that remains classified as forested land. However, that statistic does not count those forests that are replanted and regenerated. So we are losing that. When we say deforestation in that first line of the 950,000 acres, we are learning, or we know that land is being converted from forest to some other purpose, whether it's agriculture, housing, business parks, whatever. And deforestation could increase at a faster rate in the future because as we get all these new tree pests in, bark beetles, emerald ash borer, all those kinds of things, they are wiping out huge numbers of trees on their own, which we cut them down for obvious reasons, but if they die on their own because of an infestation, that's just facilitating more of a change, and then of course accelerates the climate change. So some of the reasons for deforestation, mining, paper production, U.S. is like in the top 5 of countries that produce paper still, even after we've tried to get away from that. produce paper, you have to cut down trees. They go hand in hand. Overpopulation is a huge factor because as our population continues to grow, we have to provide food, we have to provide places for people to live, where are they going to go, and so they continue to cut down more forests to either create new places to live, or they use that in some way to support this population. Agriculture expansion and livestock ranching, if you think back to when we had the big issue of livestock being raised on our national parks and things like that, you continue to need more land when you raise a lot of livestock. And we know with the way that a lot of the farmers are doing things now, the farming is so intensive, they're planting tiny little rows, they're planting right up to the edges, there's not a lot of other plants that are growing. A lot of that all takes land. And then, of course, climate change. After a couple more slides, we'll get into the pictures. Again, some of the effects from deforestation: increase greenhouse gas emissions, which means if you're familiar with the fact that our trees are absorbing a lot of our carbon, and when you go in and you cut an area of trees, there's always a debate as, well, do the new ones absorb more carbon because they're smaller and they're fresher, or do the older ones with bigger leaf masses? So there's always scientific information going back and forth on that, but certainly continuing to plant forests is good because we're going to need it. Our oceans are getting more acidic because a lot of the chemical runoff can't be absorbed into, say, woodland soils, because there's no woodland soils potentially in those areas. So all of that chemical runoff goes into the oceans. It is acidifying our oceans, and if you're not really sure about that, check out what's happening with the Great Barrier Reef. A very sad story about how we're losing a lot of those corals, a lot of those organisms, because the temperature is raising, the chemicals are raising, the acidity of the oceans are causing a lot of death in those areas. And of course, flooding and erosion. For any of you that live near a stream and you've had, a humongous rain episode over several hours, and your creeks rise, and all of a sudden it's in your basement, and you're thinking, I've lived here for 40 years, and this didn't happen before. Or if it did, it happened very, very infrequently. Now we're seeing it more and more, because as we remove things that help to absorb water runoffs, wetlands, we fill them in. Trees, we remove them, their roots can take up an awful lot of water, things like that. And then the flip side to that is the erosion aspect. When that water comes down and you see all your soil washing away because there's nothing to hold it back, that's a huge problem because we lose a lot of our topsoil through erosion. And of course, all of that kind of is tied into the decrease of the quality of life. So what can you do? Most people throw up their hands and say, oh my gosh, there's nothing we can do. But there are some things that you can try to help, especially in your own little part of the world. You can help to educate others. You can use renewable wood sources. So, you say you have a property and you've got some woods in there and you've had a lot of ash trees die from the emerald ash borer. Don't give those logs to a neighbor that lives in a different county. Okay, because then you're helping to spread that disease. You want to continue to use wood that a lot of the places now, if they are selling firewood, they are replanting. So check where you're getting your wood from, or check where you're getting other material that's made out of wood, where it's coming from, and is it renewable? Are they replacing what they're taking? Eat less meat. That's a biggie because we really do spend a lot of time changing our forests into agricultural land for grazing. It is a big deal. And the more demand there is for meat, the more demand there's going to be for the animals. And of course, everything works that way. Work with forest-derived products. So a lot of these, if you look now, there's a lot of companies that are making things that, yes, they're using wood, but they're adding things to it, and they're changing the wood so they're not using as much. So there's a lot of different products out there that can be very, very helpful in not using so much wood or trees that would then tend to make people go out and cut more forests down. Reduce your consumption in general. Do your recycling. Look at all the materials that you're using. The only way you can get a company to stop making things that are not, and putting them in packaging that's not recyclable is don't buy them. If they're finding that they're not getting the sales because of their packaging, they'll change their packaging because it's, again, they're out there to make money. They don't necessarily want to do the wrong thing. They just probably are doing the cheaper thing. And by doing the cheaper thing, you're using products that you don't necessarily, or are necessarily not able to be able to recycle those. Reduce your paper consumption. It's been really nice having things online so that you're not constantly printing off things. When I was a teacher, everything that went to the kids was, you know, a packet of paper